Hey everyone, welcome to the Midpoint Review. I'm your host, AJ Tabando, and we've got a great show for you today. I'm joined by my friend Lina Khatib to reflect on her life journey up to this point, all the inflection points she's navigated already, and how this midpoint inflection is different. We touch on what it's like to manage career and motherhood as a person who wants to achieve their full potential in both, and the role that her Muslim faith plays in her life, and how her relationship with it evolves as she does. But the thing I'm going to take away the most from our conversation is our discussion on boundaries, her perspective on setting them, sharing them, and asking people to meet them. Before we get started, shout out to our sponsor, Habit Coffee Club. Habit's easy drinking diner roast makes me want to drink 10 cups every time I have it. It's good, maybe a little too good, but don't take my word for it. Find out for yourself by visiting www.habitcoffeeclub.com to order a bag or sign up for a subscription and use the promo code midpoint at checkout for 20% off your first purchase. That's www.habitcoffeeclub.com. All right, let's start the show. Welcome everyone to the Midpoint Review. I'm super excited for today's guest, Lina Khatib. Some people come into your life for only a brief period, but leave an outsized impact. In my life, Lina is one of those people. She's a policy strategist, a writer with a career that has spanned the nonprofit, government, and corporate sectors. We crossed paths in the early days of Palette, and I knew I was working with someone special. She works in areas of equity-driven policy, organizational culture, and social impact. She has had seasons as a full-time caregiver for her family and seasons of full-time work. And now she's in the season of her midpoint review, trying to figure out how to merge all of those things together, her personal, professional, and creative worlds. I'm so excited to have her here today to share her experiences with us. So Lina, welcome to the show.
Thank you, AJ. So happy to be here. I'm so excited to talk about this point. And yeah, there's so much to say. Where should I start?
Well, for our listeners who don't know you, why don't you tell them a little bit more about yourself?
For sure. Okay, so my background is in public policy and I studied policy. I always thought I was going to work in government and be there for the rest of my life. But of course, life played out very differently. It had a lot to do with my family moving around a lot. And so we moved back and forth between Toronto and Calgary. And when I arrived in Calgary, I realized quickly we don't have a lot of government jobs here. So I better figure out what I'm going to do. And that's what brought me into the nonprofit world. I worked at the United Way at Calgary, at the nonprofit chamber as well. It was a wonderful experience. I absolutely loved being in that ecosystem. Calgary is an amazing place. But then I came across this term that somebody shared with me way back in the day. And I don't know, AJ, if I've mentioned it to you before, but it was the idea of a career triathlete. And I was just like so excited. I was like, what is that? I want to be that. And it's the idea that it's somebody who has had experience in government, but also in nonprofit NGO world and also in the corporate business world. And the kind of value and perspective that you can bring as a person when you've dabbled into these different spaces. And so I'm like, I want to do that. I want to be that. And I would start like asking people and interviewing people when I would find them, which was actually pretty uncommon, but people who shifted from public to private. I'm like, where are these people? How did it happen? How did you do that? And there was no real like one specific way of how people would make that shift, but I was really determined. And eventually I did get to the point where I got to experience those three different sectors. And I think now where I am, and I think you mentioned it, is I've taken a pause from that world. I left my corporate job back in August, intentionally, purposefully. And it has given me a chance to really sit back and reflect on what that whole journey was like, what I learned, what I want to, as you say, AJ, like what I learned, what I want to, the things I want to take and the things I want to leave.
Right. Yeah.
So that's kind of where I'm at right now. There's been a lot of reflection and, you know, I mean, there's a lot to say about that, but that's kind of a little bit about me and how I started and where I am now.
Yeah, that's amazing. And congratulations for accomplishing the triathlete, badge of honor. I love that concept. I do remember you mentioning it to me years ago. And it's always nice, I think, when you are a generalist to some degree, which, when you're dabbling in multiple different sectors, you often are. It can be hard to know how to have an identity around that. I remember earlier days, people would be like, so what do you do? And I was just like, I genuinely don't really know how to answer that question. Like, cause you're asking me to tell you that I'm a project manager or a software engineer or a construction worker or a nurse or, and it's like, I don't know. I'm a planner.
And try answering that to your kids.
Yeah. 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 I know. I know. It's true. It's totally true. It's confusing. But so I love that you were able to find a title, a definition, and sort of build a career around that.
Yeah.
So I am super interested in this most recent period, and digging into that a little bit more. As you and I think most of our listeners know, I went through my own period of being away from work and using that time to reflect, and so much of what this podcast's existence has spawned from that time. And I just know how powerful and transformative those periods can be, whether you choose to be in them, or they choose you. And I would love to hear more about what led you to choose with intention to step away from work for a little while, and how you use that period of time to reflect, and where you've landed on what you're taking and what you're leaving behind.
I'm absolutely great questions, AJ. You're so good at this.
Well, thank you.
So, and I can't speak without, I think it's so important to recognize what it means to be a woman right now in this world, and specifically at the midpoint. And I can only speak on my behalf, but, these are the kinds of conversations I have with my girlfriends, and the idea that, it is oftentimes a period where a lot of women start to shed a lot of the expectations that have been put on us throughout our lives. I think being in your 20s as a woman is really hard. And it's glamorized, and it's like, well, you're young and you can do anything, but it weighs very heavy. There's so much pressure to be beautiful, to be agreeable, to, live up to people's expectations. And I think it's actually the beauty of aging, especially as a woman, is being able to start to shed some of that and figuring out like what it is that you actually want to be. And the idea of the superwoman realizing what a facade that is. And I think that's kind of what I was hitting up against at, years into my corporate career. The idea that you can do it all. Your kids can be well dressed, and you have your career and a clean home, and you're fun, and everybody, and it's like,
and you can have your mental health.
The cherry on top. Yeah, exactly. And so I've never hesitated to press pause. This isn't the first time. And it's something that I do actually feel very proud of. But to your point, AJ, around like, how do you tell people like what you do? It's one of the hardest times to do that is when you are in a pause. So there's a book that came out recently called Power Pause by Neha, I can't remember her last name, but basically the whole book is about how we need to redefine the way we talk about people who are caregiving at home, specifically mothers, and that it's not, housewife versus career woman. And there's so much in between all of that. And a lot of women have so much ambition, and there's so much they're working on, even while being, primary caregivers. And so for me, like, I have spent a lot of time as the primary caregiver in my family, but I've also had so much that I wanted to do in my life. And now this pause that I'm in right now is the first time that I've actually explored passion projects, or whatever we're going to call them. I don't know what we're going to call our podcasts and our, writing and all of that. And it's like, we always knew it was inside of us, but it was like, we were waiting for that moment. And for me, it's like now. Like it has to be now. And so that's what this pause has meant for me. And again, it's challenging. You leave your job, you're like, who am I? Like, what's my title? And it's like, but then you have to face the reality of, I am so much more than those things. So then that journey again begins, and you figure out, who you want to be. And so for me, it's been, and because I have, done some work and been speaking to a therapist about this journey, and she talks a lot about this idea of integration. And I think I mentioned it to you, AJ, but integration, and I don't even fully understand what that means yet, but I know I want it. And it's beyond work-life balance. It's beyond, just like hitting those goals and milestones. It's about, I like to think of it as like when I was studying, for example, in university, I was studying political science, but then I also was studying creative writing, because inside of me, I was like, there's so much more like that I have that I want to explore, but I never knew how to bring those worlds together. Never. I never knew how to actually combine these two parts of my identity. And this next phase of my life, I feel like, is all about that. How do I be a mother, but also a policy professional, but also an activist, and also, somebody who's passionate about creative writing? Like, it's just, that to me would be the most beautiful thing if I could tie those things together.
Yeah. Wow. I think that's such a shared feeling for people finding themselves in this moment. And I think it is probably common for any generation that's gone through this period of life probably has some of these moments of reflection and desire for change and questioning. I think it's particularly relevant for our generation, given that so many of the things that we were told we should strive for are no longer necessarily available. Or so many of the promises around, work hard and that'll be fulfilling, and you kind of get there and you're like, it's not so much fulfilling, right? And yet you still want big parts of these things, right? And I think it's really beautiful to take the time away to be able to really sit with yourself and say, okay, but what do I want? Right. And what does good look like for me? And it's really hard to hear your voice respond to you when you are working and hustling and hearing lots of other voices out there telling you what to do, right? Or who to be or how to be. And so I think there's, it's certainly a bit of a privilege to be able to intentionally choose to pause, or to, in my case, not choose it, but really be able to embrace it and not have to rush back into something. But if you have the opportunity to take it, it can be so powerful.
I completely agree. And I think it wouldn't be right not to reflect on the privilege of being able to even make those kinds of decisions 100%. I will say too that something that helped me through these transitions, because I've had many of them and I've had to re-enter the workforce, and then that's something that I think is another topic that to talk about, what it's like as a woman to re-enter the workforce multiple times.
Sure.
But this idea that I am where I am needed, it's truly gives me peace at the end, because it's like, whether I'm at home with the kids, or I'm working on a project or a community engagement opportunity or whatever. And I think you can think about it too from your perspective, AJ. It's like, truly, you're constantly trying to solve problems where you feel like you're best equipped to do that particular thing, because this is where you have your expertise. This is where you are needed right now, where the world needs you to be. And in that moment, when I decided to leave my job, I was like, I know where I'm needed right now. And it's not in this space.
Yeah.
I need to be home, and not just for my kids, for myself.
Yeah.
I need it for myself. That's where I'm needed right now. And so I kept that as kind of my mantra, this is where I'm needed right now. And actually I do. And I'm now in the midst of a new transition where I'm like, I don't think I'm needed here.
Yeah.
Everybody's so independent. My kids are 10 and 8 now. And of course they're always going to need us as parents, but I'm ready to embrace the new opportunities, and I'm out there and I'm meeting and talking to people, and I'm excited about what comes next.
Yeah, I love that. I love, what a wonderful framework to think about this stuff. Is being where you're needed and letting that pull you, because I think that we can feel that really strongly and yet get so tied up in the stories that, the society kind of tells us about what we should be doing. I think at the end of the day, what we should be doing is what we feel called to do, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes that means work being the number one thing, because you're creating something or you're building something where you just feel so pulled to do something important through the channel of work. And sometimes that means writing and storytelling and creating, which I would call art. And sometimes that means resting, I think that that's the other thing. And that was a big thing for me, that when I took my pause, I really gave myself permission to just listen to my body. And my body was like, girl, lay down, and I think that that's the other thing, is that, sometimes the most productive thing we can do is stop thinking about productivity and start just thinking about what we need, where are we needed and what do we need?
Mm-hmm. There's a book called Rest is Resistance.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I should be paid as a brand ambassador for that book. I have gotten so many people onto it. It's such a great book.
I'm not surprised to hear you say that. That's amazing. I'm so happy you embraced that, and it's so needed. I want to tell you something, because I don't know if you know this, but back in 2021 or 2020, now my years are mixed up.
It was a blurry period of time.
Thank you. But I was re-entering the workforce, as I do. I decided for the first time that I'm going to put my maternity leave on my resume. And I'm going to talk about it. And I'm going to talk about what I learned from that and how I grew from it and how it makes me actually more valuable in the workplace. And I applied to a bunch of jobs that I was interested in. And then I got an interview with an amazing person named AJ.
Oh, come on. Come on.
Oh, I have to tell you what happened after we chatted and all that. And then you actually, at one point, you thanked me. You said, thanks for including your maternity leave in your resume. And I was like, she's a keeper. And then I went ahead on LinkedIn and I started like posting about what happened. And I was like, I was thanked by an interviewer, literally thanked. You know, this is something we need to talk more about. It's something I'm really passionate about. And I don't think I've ever had a post on LinkedIn get shared so many times, like, and almost 1,000 likes, like people I don't even know. And I was like, whoa, there's a whole like world, like audience out there who wants to talk more about this and like women reintegrating. And then I started researching about it. There's things called like returnships for women, like,
yeah.
And I love the concept. And I love the idea of supporting women through those transitions, but I'd never want to, you know, reduce it to something that seems like an internship because again, it's all about the fact that these women bring so much value.
Yeah.
Not really being acknowledged. And we talk a lot about, you know, workplaces we'll talk about. And because I've worked in organizational strategy and I've seen companies across so many different types of structures and cultures and what they're trying to infuse in their workforce and the purpose, why they exist. And a lot of companies will talk about, you know, a really good indicator is when people can talk about their families and like they can be themselves, which I completely agree with. But there's a difference between being able to like talk about your family and actually be valued for who you are outside of work. And like being able to like tease out, like, what is that value that you can bring beyond what's on your resume? And really, again, that whole person, that integration in the workplace, that's part of the job. The part of what I loved about my job was like being able to, you know, describe those things to the clients that I worked with. And like, how do we create an environment like that? How do we create psychological safety? That was a big thing that I worked on when I was at Corn Ferry. And so, you know, all that to say, like, I think it was back in 2020, still super relevant, had a huge impact on me. And quite frankly, like, I don't know. Like, I think there's just so much more to be said about it. We're not done on this topic.
Yeah, no. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's such a lovely story. And I don't remember saying that, but I do remember I think I had just kind of come back to work myself after having my son.
Okay.
And I remember, you know, I remember interviewing you in 2020 and it was COVID and we had all just gone into lockdown and it was all chaotic. And I felt, I don't know if vulnerable is quite the right word, but I was in a very small 2-bedroom apartment with 2 kids, you know, under 3. And there was no separation, right, of personal and professional. It was all in one place. And there were spaces like calls, people. It's so funny how even when you're just virtual, you can feel what kind of space you're walking into. And if it's a space where, you know, if I'm holding my baby while I'm on the call because somebody's got to, because it's all chaos, you know, whether that will be welcomed or judged. And and the words will all be the same, right? That it'll all be like baby, but you know, you can sense when they're like, oh baby.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, so I do totally believe though that, you know, I was definitely in a place where I was like, we need to just embrace this because this is a part of life and it's a wonderful part of life. And like I loved being a mother, like I love being a mother and I loved the periods of my life when that was my exclusive priority. And I learned to multitask at a way that I have never, you know, I deal with unreasonable clients, right? Like maintain emotional regulation in the face of absurdity. These are all good professional skills that you really hone when you're on a mat leave. And we need to be more appreciative of that.
I struggled a lot in my life with being assertive and like making decisions quickly, setting boundaries. And I kid you not, my children taught me how to do that.
Yeah.
And then I brought it into the workplace. I was like, this is what we need to do. This is the plan, you know, because you're managing like their lives every day. And like, yeah, anyway, so there's so much that we can transfer into.
The amount of times I, in a professional environment, have used the like name to tame strategy of dealing with other people's big feelings, right? Being like, you seem really frustrated by this situation, and like, let's talk about what's leading you to feel this way.
Yep. Never fails.
It works on my 5-year-old, works on a 45-year-old, works on a 50-year-old, it works on everybody. Well, that's amazing. So you are kind of coming off of this period and moving, preparing to transition into a new one. And so we kind of touched on this, but I am curious, what has changed for you at this time, like in this period, that you are like, these are moments of being in cocoons, right? And we emerge as new versions of ourselves. And so, yeah, what's changed, and what are you leaving behind as you become this next version of Lina?
I think that for me, like on a personal level, there's been things that I've had to sit with, like I've had to sit down and really ask myself the question of what are the things in my life that I'm doing because I truly believe it's the right thing to do and it's coming from my heart, versus the things I'm doing because it's expected of me to make other people happy, for approval. I don't know if this is a midpoint thing that a lot of people go through, or if it happens earlier for others and maybe later. Like I hear from my mother, who I think is one of the most incredible human beings on earth, that it took her much, much, much longer than it should have to get to that point, maybe later into her 50s, even 60s. And she encourages us, because we're 5 girls in my family, to get there sooner and really like live more authentically sooner rather than later. And so I've had to make some, big decisions in my life about, I'm a person of faith and I hold my faith very dear to my heart, but I've had to make decisions around how I practice my faith that are more true to me. And what I've learned from that is, again, this is like my 20s, is like when you tell somebody something and then you just kind of wait for their reaction, and you're just like so vulnerable to whatever they're going to throw back at you.
Yeah.
Whereas now, like in my late 30s, approaching my 50s, it's more about, I'm going to say what I need to say, what's in my heart, and then I'm going to let you know how I need you to support me. And then you can choose what you want to do with that. Like if you can support me, that's great. If you can't, then leave it be. Like, I don't need the negativity. I don't want to be put down or any of that. And I think you can apply that truly in any realm of your life. Whether you're dealing with a professional conflict or like an interpersonal issue, in your private personal life with your friends, like just being more clear about how you need people to show up for you. Yeah. And that's been a big moment for me, like in this past year. And that's something I want to definitely take into the coming years. And I hope teach it to my own children, and sooner, again, rather than later. But some of these things, AJ, no matter what we try to do, you can't learn, or you can't practice and understand until you've learned from your life experience. So that's the thing about that.
I love that. That's something I will take away for sure. This idea that, you don't just put yourself out there and then see if people meet an unspoken expectation. You put your expectation out there and invite people to rise to it. And if they can't, then that's not, there's clarity there, right? That's a really, that's a good one.
I love how you just said it though. You have a way of making things sound so much better.
You're just not hearing yourself speak also though, right? Like we all go on these kinds of interviews and start talking about ourselves and then kind of black out, be like, what did I just say? And then I say it back to you in basically the same words. And you're like, oh, that's smart. I'm like, no, you did, that's literally what you just said. So.
Good words. So I appreciate that.
Okay, so let's pull it back a little bit, because I do always like in these conversations to kind of connect all the personal experiences that we're having to sort of these broader collective moments that we're in, whether that is sort of the moment in history or a moment generationally. I think so many of the things that you've talked about are so relevant to broader trends that are kind of going on right now with all of us. I mean, the idea, talking about work just in general, and needing to find, balance is almost an outdated word now, right? It's, how do you integrate? And it's interesting. I just posted an episode this morning with Shannon Lee Simmons, who's a financial advisor. And if you're listening to this, I hope you already listened to that one, listeners. But one of the things that she talks about is how retirement is going to look so different. You know, the idea of just like completely stopping work at 65 is going to be probably not realistic for so many of us, but that creates this opportunity now to start building a different kind of relationship with work and you know, maybe downshifting earlier. So that's, you know, that's a really interesting theme that I feel like you're living in your personal life, but that so many people are going through. And then everything you're saying too is just as a woman kind of coming into this new period of womanhood at this moment in time, you know, I'm struck by what you said about your 20s being hard. Like in hindsight, when I see the version that I am now and I think about the version that I was then and so many of the fears and anxieties and imposter syndrome and expectations that I was tied up into, it felt a lot harder than it does now, I think. This feels hard in different ways, but that was a different kind of hard in hindsight, you know? And so, you know, women are having this moment talking about femininity, right? And masculinity. We're talking about having this moment talking about work. How do you see some of these things tying to these broader conversations that we're having?
Gosh, yeah, there's definitely a lot going on. You know, and because I did have a chance to listen to the conversation with Shannon, which I absolutely love. And I know that there was some conversation around like the difference between the generations and the expectations around like what life is going to look like, how it unfolds, how you buy your home and how you settle and all of those things. And then us being that generation that really had to, what was it? What was the term? It was like,
Wake up and smell the coffee.
Yes, wake up and smell the coffee. Like the whiplash.
Yeah. Yes.
And that like totally resonated with me. And it got me thinking also about, I don't know what to call it, but I think it's like our generation, like the millennials, I think have like this intergenerational awareness that where, and maybe it's like a bridge between like our parents' generation and then the generation that we're raising or that came after us, because we kind of know what it was like before. We're not necessarily living that dream at the moment, but then we also have an idea of what this next generation is grappling with, and like, you know, how, if at all, can we be that bridge between the past and the future? I mean, I'll never know what it's like to grow up as a Gen Alpha or whatever we're calling it today. But I definitely have a bigger clue than my immigrant parents did about what I was going through. And so, you know, when it comes, so here's the thing. So it's really, I still believe that it's important to really like get to know who you are as a person. Like I try to give my that, and my kids are still super young, and like I actually do not like the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? I do not ask such things to my children, because that's not the world we live in. You know, there's so much more to that, and people change their careers multiple times, and it's really more about like what drives you, and more importantly being somebody who's adaptable. Like we know that the skills of the future are very different. Now I'm getting remnants of our palette days, right? And so I'm really trying to create a space for my kids where it's not so anxiety ridden, because there's a lot of anxiety when we talk about these things. And I know I mentioned my faith earlier, but it is part of my practice. What I was taught growing up is that in Arabic, the word is rizq. It's like what will be given to you in this world is already written. What you're going to receive, you know, monetarily, financially, in whatever ways you want to look at it, it's actually already written. That's not to say you shouldn't strive and you shouldn't try and you shouldn't work towards your goals, but it's a release and a relief to know that things are, you know, unraveling the way that they're supposed to. And I kind of feel like we need a little bit of this like untangible element in our lives, because there's just too much anxiety and there's too much feeling that we actually have control over everything when we don't. And so you know, I don't have obviously a solution to this. Like, I know we have a housing crisis. I know that people who have like steady full-time work are struggling to make ends meet. Like, it's not sustainable. This is, you know, we are in a like a very difficult, tough time, but we're also a super creative generation, and people are exploring parts of themselves that they never thought that they could. And I actually think the previous generation, like as beautiful as it sounds, like that they were living in these glory days, like there's a lot that we have that they didn't have, and a lot of opportunity that we have that they never did. And I think that's going to be a common thread with most people who talk about their parents' generation. Like, I get to do the things they never dreamt of doing. And so, you know, it's just like with everything. You have to take the good with the bad. I'm just telling you the things that help me sleep at night. Like,
Yeah.
obviously this is not going to work for everybody, but like you do have to surrender a little bit in the sense of like, some things are written and you just have to kind of surrender to that. But also, again, in our tradition, we have an expression where it's like, it's the idea of like, how do you balance like taking control over a situation, but also leaving it be? And it's like, can you just leave your camel? I know this is such a crazy example, but can you just leave your can you
I love it.
can you just
Yeah.
leave your camel in a desert and sleep at night and expect that everything's going to be okay in the morning? No, you have to tie your camel and
Mhm.
then trust that everything's going to be okay in the morning. Like, do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah.
You don't just, okay, and then people complain about like, the next generations and how everybody's like careless and and doesn't really want to put in the work. But it's like, no, there's the beauty to that. There's like a beauty to like being free and like letting yourself, explore different parts of yourself. But then there's the pragmatism of like, yes, I need to time my camel. And like,
Mm.
I don't want to toot our own horn, but we might be the generation that actually understands that best.
Mhm.
And that's what we can offer to the world, is like, how do you find that balance between both?
I love all of that, and I think that it's so true that we are this bridge between worlds, absolutely. And I think that comes with a responsibility, and it's not to um I mean, we all need to do everything we can with what we have to leave the world better than we found it. I think
Mm,
if folks have ever heard me speak, they'll know like that kind of goes without saying. That's my shtick. But at the same time, I think we like giving the next generation the gift of having some softness in their life
mm,
around how they try, how they fail, because they're going to, and everybody does, and that's normal and should be normalized. I see this a lot. I like to follow millennial manager meme accounts. I get a lot of like personal joy out of all of those. And like it's always the same kind of thing where it's just like jokes about how, the millennial manager now is this like block between all the like boomer bullshit rolling down the mountain and, the next generation of employees below. And they're kind of there just like catching it and pushing it back up. And it means we're going to deal with a lot of shit, right? But it's also kind of our job to release the next generation of some of like the burdens of previous generations. And this comes up all the time in various different ways, this idea of like cycle breaking and, unlearning but I think that is a unique position that we have because we can do it with empathy on both sides because we've lived these sort of two different lives in these two different worlds. And we really understand Gen X and Boomer, say elder Gen X, because I feel like, younger ones and elder millennials, it's all very blurry, but like, like a certain age of folks who were well into adulthood when, internet culture really became a thing and never kind of grew up with that. And so we had enough of a life in that world to be able to like understand and empathize with it and speak
mhm,
that language
mhm,
while also having enough of a formative period of life in the new world to be able to like understand and empathize with it.
mhm.
And it is definitely a powerful thing for us.
I agree. And I want to explore more what that role looks like for this, generation of ours. The other thing I wanted to mention to you, because I think I mentioned like the housing crisis, a
Mhm.
trend that I'm noticing again, just in my circles. And because like a lot of families that came here from other parts of the world came, of course, with this, beautiful like vision of what their family's going to be able to accomplish here in Canada
Yeah.
and the West. And then the generations that grew up here, went to school here, working professionals, I'm hearing more and more like that they want out. Like they don't want to
Yeah.
be even like they're like, let's explore other parts of the world. Like this isn't working. Like I
Hmm.
can't buy a home. I can't, like, how will I raise a family? And like, I
Yeah.
don't think I've ever heard people talk like that, like, and so seriously,
Yeah.
and more now than ever. Especially because like where I'm from, my background, and like, let's go back to the Middle East. Like I just never thought a day would come where,
Yeah.
I mean, it's, or like, the Gulf areas. And
Mhm.
so that to me is like a cause for pause. Like we need to really question what's going on here and why people feel like they can't build a life and a future for themselves. And these are people who've like, from the outset, like fully we're all in, like investing and, wanting to grow and, build a life and contribute.
Yeah.
So there's a story, I think, around that. And how do we win people back, to
Yeah.
wanting to really be part of the story here in Canada? And I think there's also, because I was in the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion at the height of like when George Floyd was murdered in 2020, and there was so much of momentum around
Mm-hmm.
that world. And there's an extremely evident backlash.
Mm-hmm.
And so at this point in time, I wonder, like, are we throwing, oh gosh, this is the worst expression ever. I need a better one, but the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
like, can we just like, again, like pause for a second? Like, what are we actually saying here? And like, there have been some like hard fought for rights that people, and the area that I'm specifically interested in and have spent a lot of time on is like women's rights and like,
Mm-hmm.
because it does all kind of just get bundled into this big package of like, okay, out with the old, in with the new. And it's like, it's all actually part of the same thing. Like
Yeah.
we're everybody wants we want new, we want change, but should we throw out everything that we've worked so hard towards? And like in that, again, because we have this issue of increased polarization, and so it's like either this or that, and there's no in between. And can we talk more about the in between? And so I think that's kind of where we're at. And again, back to maybe the role that we play as this middle generation. And yeah, can we help buffer some of that? That would be
Yeah.
a big question mark.
Totally. I think that's one of the unique things I think about all of us going through this moment of personal change and quote unquote crisis. But I don't know that I feel it like we're actually in a midlife crisis so much as just this midpoint review of looking at everything and kind of questioning it. And I think that's what's so interesting is that this is a moment of midpoint review that is happening both personally and collectively, of, okay, we've built this economy that has created, tremendous wealth and growth and all these things, though we're very clearly seeing now, and it's been happening for a long time, but now it's so widespread, the unaffordability and sort of inequity of gains of who's really thriving in it and who's struggling. And that doesn't mean struggling in the sense of being close to being on the street, but just people who have every reasonable expectation of being able to accomplish certain things and no longer see a path forward to being able to do that. And I think so much of what you've described on that side is this, it comes back to some of the conversations around this playbook of life being disrupted, that there used to be this sense that you put your head down, you work hard, you do all these things, and like, yeah, you might give up certain elements of life in the process, but you will have access to other things like being able to raise a family with a certain level of baseline prosperity, that you will be able to live in a home that you can afford to live in and that you can be confident you will be able to remain in, whether that means ownership or renting. The stability of housing, is inherently part of the challenge, right? And all of these things, we're having these moments of personal reckoning in our own lives of saying like, whoa, I'm hitting 40 or close to it or past it or whatever. And, I'm either, not hitting some of these milestones that I was told to think that I should hit and that I totally bought into in my 20s and built some of my identity around, or I've hit a couple of them and the promise of the value is not aligned with what I feel like I'm getting. And, not sure that this is what I want to buy into anymore. Right. And yeah, it's this, there's a crossover moment happening between these collective changes. And even it's really interesting with the backlash in DEI and, that there was certainly like an acceleration of awareness in 2020 and after George Floyd and then, here in Canada around residential schooling and just all these things. It seemed like we are kind of waking out of a slumber, but it was on this path of progression that like, it seemed to me, when I was younger, like we were always trying to be less racist. I don't know how else to, there was like this sense that like there's a shared vision of what we're trying to get to as a society and unlearn and do and behave. And then like in the last year, it's like, no, maybe we're okay being like that, and it's really messed up that, like,
Yeah.
yeah, that we're having this moment of, again, just these sort of this sense of promise of what to expect the future to look like, and then getting here and it being like, no, not going to look like that. And how do you
And
deal with that
I
personally?
think it's from like it's I believe that ultimately human beings all do want the same thing because we all have a common human experience. We all want to be
Hmm.
loved, understood, respected, etc. And some of the deviation or what feels like deviations from that is just deep rooted frustration. And the more
Yeah.
frustrated people are, the more we start getting these kind of backlashes that feel like we're going against progress. And I know I mentioned passion projects earlier, but I wanted to just mention that this theme of not just tolerating differences, but like embracing and accepting differences has been something that has been like a thread through most of my career experiences. And it's something that we talked a lot about in my most recent role at Corn Ferry, but like, in the workplace, like, how do we get to a place where we could sit at a table with people who are so different from us and actually grow in appreciation for those differences and not just tolerate them and accept
Yeah.
it. Even acceptance is not even, I think, what we should be striving for. Like it's beyond that.
Yeah.
And so part of what I was hoping to kind of work on actually over the summer is that storytelling piece around giving people a platform to share just about who they are and where they come from, how they came to be, but then using that as a space where people who otherwise would never interact with each other have an opportunity to do that and like to connect and like see that humanity in one
Yeah.
another, because in the world that we live in today and the issues that we're seeing in the news, like whether it's geopolitical issues, wars, and all of that, like it's just like people are so easy to write off. It's like, oh, you're from that community, this is what you think, okay, I don't want anything to do with you.
Yeah.
But then, and it's no surprise that we got to this point, right?
Yeah.
Where there's this like big backlash towards what I think is what we were striving for, which is appreciation for one another
Yeah.
and our differences.
And an understanding of our shared humanity, like you said. I think that's something that,
We
um,
need more spaces where we do that, where we talk about that, and very openly. And so I'm still exploring what that looks like from a creative perspective, because I do want to tap into the creativity and maybe pick up some new skills, photography, perhaps.
love it.
Right? It's never too late. That's one thing I wanted to definitely say at this point is like it's like we're at this funny point where it's like we're not like, I think maybe you even said this, AJ, it's like we're not like young anymore,
Yeah.
but we're not like old either. Like we're
Yeah.
just right. And so we have to keep reminding ourselves that like it's never too late. There's something you wanted to try. Now's the time. Like don't stop now.
Yep.
And I learned this because I always wanted to play piano my entire life. When I was
Mm.
It was like my dream. We're a family with 6 kids. It just wasn't in the cards for me growing up. And then when I had my 2 children, I started them with piano when they were 4. And it's just a part of who they are. Like they can't imagine life without playing piano. And so they play and they love it. And I would sit there and I would listen to them play and it would make me so happy. And then one day I signed my daughter up for piano lessons because we had moved. And then the timing didn't work out for her. And then the music school was like, sorry, but you already paid for the month. And I was like, okay, well then can I take the lessons? And
Oh,
then they were
cool.
like, it was like totally by accident, but they were like, yeah, sure. I'm like, but I'm not committing to more than a month. Like I didn't say that I was like, I'm just doing this because I already paid for it. And then whatever. So then like I sat down and I went to my first lesson, and I never expected this, but I actually got so emotional at the end of the lesson. The piano teacher was like, are you okay? I was like, no, sorry. It's just like this moment where like I didn't realize that like that I would ever get to like do this. Like I just didn't think
Yeah.
that it would happen. I always just thought that ship has sailed for me. My kids will learn piano. It's a really simple example, but when I see older people who like even my own parents, like they suddenly decided in their 60s and 70s that they want to learn Turkish just because.
Why not?
And I'm like, good for you.
Yeah.
Like just
Never
keep
stop growing, right?
never stop. And so now the kids laugh because they tell their dad, they're like, everybody in the house plays piano, but you need to get on it.
There you go. Kid peer pressure is a powerful influencer, but that's amazing. Kudos to you for jumping in and doing that. And like, I think there's something so powerful about the experience of learning new things when you're older, because we forget what it feels like to learn something and how humbling it can be. But then you do learn it and you realize like, oh yeah, I still have such a capacity to expand. I'm not stuck in this. I can keep going. I really appreciate everything about this conversation. And I want to ask you one final question before we go. And this is, since you listen, you know probably what question is coming. We're so often asked what a piece of advice would be that you would give to your younger self. But since we look forward in this podcast to think about the future, I'd like to know what would be a piece of advice you would give to your future self.
It's funny, AJ, because you would think I would have thought this through because but I honestly, okay, and I actually do love that idea of thinking about my future self. But I think it would be to really be proud of where, of like, of how far you've come. And treat each, because I like the word seasons, but like each version of yourself, with its in the seasons that you've lived, like an individual in their own right, right? Like it's not like it's not like as if you're a different person, but like I truly see like who I was as a child, as a teenager, as an adult, who I am now, who I am later, as different people. That all, again, it's back to the integration. Like treat them all as their own unique individual, love them for who they are, appreciate them, appreciate the struggle, the journey that you've been on. And as much as you want to kind of look back and appreciate all of that, like always look forward as well, and know that it's never too late to try something new. And that's what keeps you alive and what keeps you energized, and is the way that I would want to end my life, is just never saying no and never stopping myself from doing something that I want to do. So I hope I continue living in that way.
I love that. That's beautiful advice for all of us to take. Lina, thank you so much for taking the time to come on this podcast today. It's been wonderful catching up with you and hearing about everything you've learned on this journey so far. And I'm excited to hear where this journey takes you next. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye.
All right, that's our show. Thank you, Lina, for being such an amazing guest. Thank you again to our sponsor, Habit Coffee Club. Visit www.habitcoffeeclub.com and use promo code midpoint at checkout for 20% off your first purchase. That's it for our show today. We'll see you guys next week.